Hey. It's the Practical Prayer Podcast pre-show on New Thought Media Network. That's Carol over there. Yeah, and that's Bill over here. And we're dangerously close to recording another episode of the Practical Prayer Podcast. Episode number 179, closing on the end of season 15. Wow. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is how time flies when you're having life. That's going to be part of the topic today. We're also going to do some on vocabulary. But I want to say hi to the folks who are on New Thought Media Network with us now, because this is the casual, informal, impromptu portion of the program. We're going to start recording in a minute or two. But in the meantime, if you have a question or a comment or something that you want to share with us, you can put it into the comments and we can engage directly. And if you're watching the recording, which apparently a lot of people like to do, you can go to bethelight.com, be-the-light.com, like it says over there. And there's a Practical Prayer Podcast section, and you can put the same comment or question in there if you would like to do so. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And oftentimes, my esteemed partner Carol will say that we have veered off in a direction and not completely addressed the topic that we started with. And we have the passage of time and the vocabulary of New Thought as the topic. So that's sort of a mushed together topic. So I'm going to be interested to see a half an hour from now exactly how good a job we did. Because there's a lot to it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Anything you want to say before we start the episode? I'm raring to go.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
Here we go. On your mark, get set.
A practical prayer is a prayer that works.
These discussions between Reverend Bill Marchiony and Carol Lawrence dive into the details of how it works and how to work it.
Reverend Bill is a New Thought minister and the author of Practical Prayer for Real Results.
Your new life begins with a new thought.
Carol Lawrence is on a spiritual quest, finding the New Thought teaching after decades on the pulpit in 3 different traditional denominations.
I've got some questions.
Together, they're exploring the philosophy and activities that come together from many of the world's religions to create the practical spirituality that is New Thought.
Welcome to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol, here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony.
You have wonderful ideas for an episode of the Practical Prayer Podcast for today.
Yeah, I think...
You started with a good one, and then you added another good one on top of it, so I'm going to see where we go with this.
Okay, so I don't remember what good one I started, but
Time.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how time... From everybody, it's not just me, but people are just saying, time just moves so quickly and things are changing. And so I try to put a beginning place to focus. And so I'm a baby boomer, obviously. And things are changing quickly to me. But when I look at from a perspective of a baby boomer, that generation and the values and the things that happened that nurtured that generation were it was so long. It was not a whole lot of change during, the 40s, 50s, the 60s started to change a bit. And then when those babies grew up, then, things started changing more quickly. But now it just seems like it's not every 10 years changes. It's like every 2 years are changing. And we're feeling it. And I think the anxiety that people feel are trying to say, okay, where do I start? But as soon as I start, it's changing again. And it's attitudes, it's the way we define things or redefine them. You can't get a grip on it. And that's when I mentioned to you New Thought and the concern of, how do you attract people to New Thought or any philosophy that you hold dear. things change and circumstances are in such, I don't want to say disarray, but sort of feels that way. Where's my center at which I can balance things against? And when the language has changed in so many ways, and I know you'll speak to that, I before I can get a grip on making sense of it, it's changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So, and I'm going to recall back, and I'm going to use some marketing phrases. One of them is, "There's an app for that." Remember, there's an app for that?
Yes.
It was
yes.
shortly after smartphones came out and apps were a thing, and suddenly everything could be turned into an app. And of course, now everybody takes that all for granted. Nobody says there's an app for that because, of course, there's 17 million apps, and there are countless people spamming me in my email offering to make an app for me. And 20 years ago, I would not have known that I needed an app because there was no such thing as a smartphone 20 years ago. I was actually into phone technology when I was a teenager. I was one of those geeky kids, and I built a phone into a briefcase. It was kind of cool. Now, you still had to plug it into a phone line in order to make it work, but it was just kind of fun to have a briefcase. You carry it around, it didn't look like a phone. It just for fun. And we used to have landlines, and that's all we had. I was thinking the other day about when I first moved to Philadelphia, and I was working on a morning show on a radio station, and there were people who were I'm going to get together with some friends afterwards, and I was staying in a hotel because I was brand new in town, and they didn't call me, and I had no way of getting a hold of them or figuring out where they went. So I was completely stymied, and that is so contrary to the way things work today, where it's like you can call somebody anytime, day or night, or text them, or WhatsApp them, or there's so many ways to communicate with somebody that's just not a thing anymore. Now, when people want to duck you, they block you. They turn off their phone, or they do something else, but it's a much more intentional process than just, forgot to call. So, things change, technology changes, and time changes, and the pace of advancement. Computers were brand new in the 40s and 50s, and the power of the lunar module that landed man on the moon is a fraction of that which is in my watch. And the other question is, would I use my watch to land on the moon? Maybe there's quality control issues there as well. But yeah, time does seem to be accelerating. The pace of change is huge because there are all of those multipliers, and the technology keeps on getting better, faster, stronger, whatever. Raise your hand if you still have a landline. I got rid of my landline. Just got an email from somebody who tells me, tried calling you and it didn't work. It's like, oh. That's because you must not have tried calling it during the 9 months when the landline said this landline is no longer in service. Here's the cell phone number. So we'll see. Anyway, yes, I think technology is changing and making it seem like time is moving much more quickly. And as you're saying, that dovetails into our spirituality, because spirituality is not growing at nearly the same pace. So maybe that's why it's seeming less interesting.
Is it supposed to? Things change, but we're still humans. And I think that there's a consistency in our growth pace. Our growth, I don't think, can accelerate at the speed of the change of technology. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of social unrest, because so much is expected of the human, and I'm thinking about young people, to be in pace with the pace of the change of the world. It takes time to grow up. It takes time to mature, and experiences to bounce against each other. so that you can come up with some conclusions that are workable. But it seems like the world has just doesn't allow for the natural growth process and the natural intellectual process. And in that, I'm questioning, is there a natural growth spiritually that perhaps is getting just ignored, and people are just, because churches are empty. Now, the pandemic certainly did have something to do with that, but that was happening before the pandemic.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's continuing to happen, and even more quickly because of the pandemic.
And what I'm seeing is that the meeting, trying to rebuild something in the old way that it used to be built, it's not going to work anymore. It's not working. But I see persistence instead of saying, okay, let's see what we can do to upgrade, you know what I mean? Our upgrade our thinking to where the world is now. You know, I think back when I was, I'm not going to say when, but
A while ago, sometime
yeah,
in the past.
a while ago, when gospel music was the devil's music, and the church just was vehemently against it, and at that time I wasn't in it, but I was kind of an onlooker, thinking I don't see what the problem is. You know, I just don't see it. But you know, I wasn't aware of the older perspectives of. I wasn't concerned with the devil. I just didn't see it. So it seems like that same idea is being carried over, or that same attitude is being carried over to the changes that we're facing right now. Just how can this be good for us? How can we redefine things so that we can be in pace and be in harmony with the change, as opposed to trying to turn it back and being angry with the people who don't want to, you know, go back and make space or create space for newness to be okay. It's okay. If we change the name of something, it's still the same thing.
Yep.
But, you know, now I'm a big fan of saying this means that it used to mean that, but we're using this. I'm a big fan of helping the transition. Now
Right.
that might be a bit slow. You know, we may not have time for all that. I don't know. But I think when you want to help people understand, you have to help them understand what it was, and now invite them into something new, not bash what was old.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to talk about that. And you know, one of my favorite things a couple of years ago, the word of the year was literally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the new definition of
yeah.
literally was figuratively.
Mm-hmm.
Because people say, I've been waiting here literally for 1,000,000 years. And they
Yeah.
literally have not been waiting there for 1,000,000 years. So literally suddenly began to mean its opposite, which was figuratively. So the language changes, and it still wasn't 1,000,000 years. So did we lose some nuance? Did we get the ability to be more evocative with our language? I don't know. There are lots of apps that are installed on my phone that will help me with my meditative practice and my gratitude journaling. And there's one that will actually let me look up a prayer or request a prayer from Silent Unity. And there's no shortage of people who are willing to pray for us on an app, and even broader array who will do that in exchange for supporting my ministry somehow. Click here to donate, and the prayers will come in immediately. And the technology makes the whole process much more accessible. So if I'm looking to do a meditation to deepen into my breath work, then it's much easier to find that now than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I have a cassette or a CD that a friend showed me, or a technique that I learned in a workshop, and I'm going to go back and look up the notes on that. I'm going to do whatever the process was, rather than turning on Insight Timer and going through, I want something that's between 15 and 20 minutes of elementary breath work. So in that case, in that sense, it's gotten much easier and much more accessible now. And in order to get the benefit of the breath work, I actually have to do the breath work. The change and the shift and the growth that's happening is still in consciousness, and that doesn't happen quickly just because we have an app, just because there's something installed in the phone in our pocket.
Yes.
The transformation takes the time the transformation is going to take. And one of the things that I teach people how to do is advanced consciousness and to do practical healing prayer for other people. And people will say, well, how long does that take? And it's like, well, actually learning the steps in the process is an afternoon. But getting to the point where you have cleared your own consciousness so that you are able to meet somebody where they are and hold the space for them, for their growth and for their healing, without projecting your own stuff onto them, that takes a while longer. That part takes a while longer. And with AI, it is now possible for me to put a prayer request into ChatGPT and have it come back with a practical prayer or a spiritual mind treatment. And I haven't specifically tried doing that, but I know exactly what's going to happen. It's going to come back with a prayer that's not bad. Because what it's doing is it's going to be comparing that to every prayer that it's ever found written down anywhere on the internet. Follow that formula and give me back the answer using the pre-digested verbiage of that prayer. The interesting thing is that there's no consciousness in artificial intelligence. It's not artificial consciousness, it's artificial intelligence. It's putting the words together, but it doesn't have any meaning behind the words. It doesn't have the consciousness behind the meaning behind the words. There is no connotation, there is no flavor, there's no passion, there's no fire. So is it possible that the prayer doesn't have any power until the person reads it? And the person who's reading it is the consciousness that's activating that prayer, and it works according to their level of belief? I'm sure nothing happens when ChatGPT creates it. That doesn't change the world at all. The world is, it's just, the universe is exactly the same as it was. Some ones and zeros got rearranged, but there's not a shift in consciousness. So as time passes and as the technology gets more impressive, it actually makes it seem like it's slowing down how long it takes to do other stuff. How long does it take to grow spiritually? Well, I started my spiritual quest when I still had a landline. And this class that I'm teaching now, there was an iPhone, third generation, and now there's an iPhone fourth generation of the same model. And that's just in the space of the time that we've been doing this one class. So the technology is growing much more quickly, but the consciousness is growing at the pace that consciousness grows. Okay, that's a lot of words. Your turn to talk.
No. You said it. It's the same thing. We're saying the same thing. Because I'm looking at it from a growth perspective, a personal human development perspective. And just like you can't hurry up physical growth. I'm saying, hello world. I don't think that we can accelerate the growth of our spiritual growth with apps, with whatever. I don't think we can do that. I'm not even sure why we would want to do that. Because you used the word consciousness, which I thought was really a perfect thing to bring in, until I have an awareness of what I'm saying and how it fits in my life. It doesn't work. It's just words. And I remember when I was a pastor a lot, I would say, you have to walk in this scripture and feel the sand on your feet. You have to put Nikes on Jesus. You got to feel what the weather was like, whatever, of course I know Nikes probably aren't the big thing now, but that's just my way of trying to just say that just take a moment, and we do have a moment. It's like right where we are now, there isn't a moment to think. There's no way to put it together to make sense. You just have to do. And I'm wondering if we are respecting the time that it takes naturally for growth to happen. Just like physical growth, is there a natural pace of growth spiritually? And of course, it depends on, I know, experiences. I think that's how I think that's how you translate your experience, your spiritual understandings become real when you translate it into or lay it juxtaposed to your experience. Now, I would certainly get in trouble in in another space by saying experience is king. But I do think experience is king and queen, whichever you choose. I think that it has to be a consideration. But, give me a chance to figure it out before we, Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements, that's like 20 years ago, I
Yeah,
think.
even more at this point.
Yeah.
It was in the 90s.
But the fact of the truth of it is still relevant. Like when
Yeah.
he said, don't take anything personally. Now that's not here anymore. That's, like you said, that's in the 90s. But that is so relevant and helpful right now. How is
Yeah.
it that we lose this?
I didn't lose it. I keep on giving that book to new people. My favorite thing is when somebody comes and says, "Yeah, I got a teenager who's interested in this stuff. What do I want to do? What do I want to give them?" Give them the Four Agreements. Give them the Four Agreements and say, "This is really simple, but there's a lot behind it." So so read through the whole thing and then we'll talk. And the ones who jump in, it's like, wow, they're not four separate agreements. They're four things that interweave on top of each other. There's a huge amount of spiritual growth that can happen just by something as simple as that. So, and as you say, it is all about the time that it takes for the growth to happen. So we've often said that the largest 18 inches is the distance between our head and our heart. And the question is, how fast can we travel that distance? And if we rush it, does that make it work better? Hint, no. No.
Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
that's the hint. Let's take a break and continue talking about this. Wow, there's a lot. Are you ready to get results? Now, that's not a rhetorical question. Are you ready to get results? RUR2GR. That's actually the abbreviation for the steps in a practical prayer. Recognition, unification, realization, gratitude, and release, with a couple of extra steps in there in case some doubt creeps in along the way. RUR2GR. This class is about the prayer technique that's common to all of the spiritual practices and religions in the most effective prayers that they have. And by effective, I mean that the prayer works. It actually creates a change in the experience of the person doing the prayer. It gets a result. We're going to begin with theory, and then we're going to take it into practice. By the end of the class, you will have your very own practical prayer that will help create transformation in your life.
Welcome back to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol, here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony. Conversation is great.
It is. And I actually wanted to mention something else that's coming up, because we're talking about the language, the vocabulary that we're using, and that it's become dated, and also that the pace of time seems to be accelerating. And I was reminded during the break that I'm actually doing a class that goes in the opposite direction. So we've often said that practical prayer is based on the patterns and the templates of prayers from all the major religions. And so I'm doing a class, it's a live class, starts on January 9th, called Do Healing Like Jesus. And we're going to go back into the Bible, into the source material, and say, this is the prayer technique that we're using, and this is where Jesus told us how to do it, and what to do, and why to do it, and why it's not it's not blasphemous, and why it works. And it intentionally using the old language. I mean, one of the books is the Practical Prayer for Real Results book that I wrote, and the other one is the Red Letter Bible, where everything that Jesus said is in red.
The reason that I appreciate that, what you're doing, when you told me that you were going to do it, I really appreciated it, because I thought it's a good way to start with what people are familiar with, what they know. So you say this is the way you do something, but their frame of reference, and not necessarily a knowledgeable frame of reference, but their comfort zone is, well, Jesus is a comfort zone, regardless of how much you believe or know about Jesus. It's just comforting to hear the name, you know,
Yep.
and yeah, and there's a lot in that and a lot to be learned. But when you create a base for people or go to where they are, it's easier for them to understand things. You know, I remember when I was taking one of your classes, and I always say it was the first class, but to me it's like one ongoing learning, one more class. You talked about, because I've always been very in tune to Jesus's prayer, and you said, well, Jesus did the the practical prayer, and this is how he did it. And I'm thinking, okay, now I know this prayer, right? I know this. So let's see how he's going to wind this up. But then you said he lived it. And bingo, the lights went completely bonkers. I said, I get it. I get it. Now I want to do it like that because I understand it in its totality. And I think that's where the magic is, you know, to meet people at that little space where that's meaningful to them. And when we come into a new place or we're trying to give different language, sometimes it doesn't have a reflection point. That's not the right thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, and the question is, do you have this day your daily bread? And if you did have it, what would it look like? And if you don't have it, what's going on? And how important is it for you to have it?
Pretty important.
Well, it depends on what people think of as their daily bread. If it's just something that you're repeating morning and afternoon, then it might not have any meaning. But that's where living the prayer comes in.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
what does fulfillment feel like? I can't tell you what your fulfillment feels like. That's your fulfillment.
It's you know, I just am in favor of not necessarily a slow pace, but a pace that is consistent with a logical growth pattern. That's just the way I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody called me and said, I've lost it. I was doing really good, and they gave me the time that they were doing spiritually really good, and they were just all totally completely frazzled, and I need, you know, and you helped me. And I said, you know what, life happens, you know, life happens, and when life happens, some things just go by the wayside. So what you do is we're going to go back and pick it up. And to me, that was just removing the anxiety of it's got to be this way now, and I don't know how to, you know what I mean? Give people, with this class, it doesn't matter. I'm thinking, based on what you said, you shared with me, it doesn't really matter how well people know Jesus. It really doesn't. It only matters that, you know, I heard of that guy. Okay, well, now what exactly? Because I know he prayed.
Yep.
No,
He has
I know
a
he prayed.
reputation for having prayed and having the
And
prayers
it worked.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were good. 40-some miracles or healings
Yeah.
that are recorded there in about Jesus. And the thing that I have learned from you, Carol, over the course of these last 3 years or whatever it is how attached people are to thinking that they already know what Jesus was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's what it says, and then there's what people say it means. And a lot of people just skip over to this is what the guy said it means, and we're going with that, rather than going back and looking at the words and saying, is that really what it means? Is it
Right.
possible that the meaning is that twisted and convoluted and it doesn't actually just mean what it says?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
what happens if we go in and look at what it actually says and put that in the context of, are we going to have the spiritual growth and transformation and healing in our own lives? And maybe he was explaining how we can do it.
It's I get it. I really, really get it. It's threatening, to think for yourself.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that unkindly, but it is threatening. It's much easier to go with what you've been told. And if it is not consistent with your reality, it's just easier to act like it's okay anyway. And say, okay, well, look, I'm just going to stay with this. And if it works, if it's fine with you to stay with that, that's fine. But we do have permission to use the brain that we've been given.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yep. Its use is
and
optional. We don't have to use it. We can.
right, right. And there's some advantages, there might be, but you can always decide not to use it, if this is not working for you. But we're created according to the biblical account. We're created in God's own image, and the words that I used that got me in a bit of a tight spot once. I have no idea where I got this from. I think it was like an instant download. I said, you are, or we are, the manifestations of God's imagination. Now, to me, that makes absolutely perfect sense. It just,
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily saying anything different. I'm just using different words. And it sounded, maybe a little bit spooky to people. But here's the thing. If we're created in the image of God and God had imagination, it does stand to reason that there is some intellectual property with God. Some, you can call it a brain, but there's some intellectual property there.
Well, some mind, yeah.
Yeah. So if that is the case and we were created in that image, then I would think it's perfectly okay for us to use that.
You're
Right?
not going to get any pushback from me.
But there's a lot of pushback. And I'm not so much concerned about, because if you're going to spend the energy to push back on such a logical conclusion as that,
Then I'm not
then,
surprised.
okay, then you can have it. My my attention goes to those who would like to explore that, but perhaps are afraid of things, are stopped by the fear of. My husband and I were talking about it yesterday, how we didn't know each other until we were adults, of course, but we had such similar Christian experiences. If you started asking questions, well, now you were in trouble. You better not ask any questions. And so my father, who was such a great influencer where I was concerned, he's rooted in this church, and apparently I was asking questions and somebody told on me. And we were driving, he was so quiet, and he said, Carol, in the softest, lowest voice, like there was nobody in the car but us. Who's going to listen? He said, just don't ask them. Just just leave them alone. And I thought that was the coolest thing, because I wasn't being punished for asking as I had been in other situations. But here's the smartest guy on the planet saying, listen, just leave them alone. Don't ask. And I thought, okay, that's cool. Maybe there's a time when I could ask, but just leave these people alone. That was so great.
Yeah. And you
but
have
everybody
gotten around to
doesn't-
asking those questions, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely.
You have
You
not
know,
skipped over any of them.
Not, I'll come back and ask a couple times. But the sad part is that feeling is still there, with a lot of people.
Yeah.
They've not given themselves permission to pursue the questions. Nothing's going to happen to you, really. It's nothing going to.
Well, maybe something good will happen.
Yeah, but nothing bad. Like you're
I
really,
don't think so.
really actually not going to hell. You
No,
really aren't.
You're definitely not going to hell. You may wind up being aware, not that you have responsibility for your life, but that you now notice that you have responsibility for your life.
Which is another frightening reality. But
Yeah.
But
it doesn't
isn't that's
It changes
yeah.
perception, but perception counts for a lot.
So with that, and we're probably going to go to a break or something because we're going long, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
That's
but
what we do.
But with that, okay, so here's the pace of growth again. You know, time is passing, and wouldn't your life be better if you allowed yourself to embrace questions or dare to ask a question? You know, it's pretty safe now to do that. And with all of this, you know, manifestation, create, co-creator of your own reality, all of those wonderful terms, it really does come back to, you know, what's your mindset? Come on, you're going to have to make a decision in order to be a co-creator. You're going to have to, so to make the magic happen, you know, that's my thing. To make the magic happen, you got to do a little bit of daring things that you didn't do before, like it's the questions.
Yep. And there's a question that's going to come up, and we are, in fact, going to take a break. And after that, we're going to do a practical prayer, which is how we end the episodes. And it is going to be a very new perspective on something that you've known about for your entire life, which the prayer is, give us this day our daily bread.
Learn to put practical prayer to work in your life. The steps are simple to learn and let you begin to get real results to create the life of your dreams immediately. Reverend Bill Marchiony's widely acclaimed book, Practical Prayer for Real Results, gives you a clear summary of the New Thought principles behind practical prayer and the series of easy-to-understand steps found in the most effective prayers from religions and spiritual practices all over the world and throughout history. Practical prayer is not a replacement for your religion or practice. It's a technique to make the work you do in consciousness even more effective. The book includes 40 prayers on various topics that you can adapt as needed and use as your own. Practical Prayer for Real Results is available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook on Amazon or at b-the-light.com. That's b-the-light.com.
Welcome back to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol, here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony.
We're having a wonderful conversation about the variable nature of time and how quickly things unfold or don't, and why it takes time for some things to happen, and also the vocabulary that we're using when we're talking about our spiritual growth. And the notion that I had before the break, and we're gonna roll with this one. It's going to be much more of a dialogue than it usually is that line from the middle of the Lord's Prayer that says, "Give us this day our daily bread." And there are all sorts of assumptions about what that means. Give us this day our daily bread. That means that we're going to get bread. So we're going to have something to eat today. And that we're not just going to have it today, we're going to have it every day. Give us this day our daily bread. Well, if it's daily bread, then why is this day special? Why are we having to ask for it for this day if it's our daily bread? You know? Give me today my daily 7 a.m. It's like, I don't have to, it's going to show up every day at 7 at 7. I don't need to do anything. And is it bread? And if it's not bread, why is it called bread? And what did he mean really? Give us this day our daily bread. And it's interesting to ask AI what that means, because it gives you very literal interpretations. It means to ask God to provide our needs and depend on Him for our everyday well-being. Well, do we have to ask? Must be the holiday season. Amazon is at my door.
I love the voice.
Yeah. Hang on a second. I need to excuse the dog.
I love the voice. He's excusing the dog, but
I'm actually firing the dog. And note to our editor, Robbie, we can take that part out. And go back to talking about asking God to provide for our daily needs and to depend on Him for our everyday well-being. And do we need to ask for that? Isn't God doing that anyway? Isn't that the nature of the infinite, is to provide everything that is required for us? So the question is, what do we mean, or what do we think it means when we say, "Give us this day our daily bread"?
You're asking me from this side who spent time on the other side what that means?
You can give me any answer you want, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, so I agree with you what you said. We don't have to ask. But I think that from that, looking at that particular scripture, I would see that it's being conscious of a higher power. There's a source.
Mm-hmm.
And you are, in asking, it's almost just recognizing that there is a source. We're in this together, yeah, co-creators, but I like to think of it as that we're partners, but there is a senior partner here,
Mm-hmm.
however you so slightly might want to look at it. So recognizing that, give us this day, is recognizing that there is a source that you need to be conscious of. That is not you.
Mm-hmm. So we open to that infinite power and invite ourselves to get that daily bread. And I love turning things around backwards to see what they mean if they don't mean, or if they're not what we're saying they are. So what is it to not have our daily bread? Well, that means that we're hungry. That means we are not fed. That means we do not have the sustenance that is required. And then I think maybe we're getting a little closer to it. We're inviting that divine creative power that creates everything, that has created us, to feed us, to fill us, to nourish us, to fulfill us, to provide the resource that's necessary to take the next step in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I have often said that hungry people make poor philanthropists, because you can't help other people if you're looking for your next meal.
Mm-hmm.
We can't.
Mm-hmm.
So give us this day our daily bread is a reminder to be in alignment with that infinite creative power, to allow ourselves to be filled and fed so that we can in turn do the work of the divine and bring more good into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about it that way and take that into a practical prayer, and start, as we start with a practical prayer all the time, by turning our attention to the infinite. When we say, "Give us this day our daily bread," we're turning to an infinite creative power, that one divine source, that one that shares itself as all of its creation. That one power and presence creates everything, has created everything, started with nothing but itself, and created everything that exists everywhere through this manifest universe. Whether we measure it as 6,000 years, as it says in Scripture, or 14.2 billion years, as the quantum physicists have told us, in the beginning there was only the one, and that one has been unfolding and expressing and expanding and sharing itself as all of its creation. And that creation now includes me and each one who is listening to this prayer. And so, as participants in this creative universe, when we claim, "Give us this day our daily bread," we are identifying that which lets us be fulfilled and sustained and empowered in living this God-given life. Everything that is required to bring more good, more love, more joy, more harmony, more peace, more uplift, whatever our fulfillment is, that power abides within and is able to provide that. Give us this day our daily bread. Allow us to be the channel through which good and more good and more good flows into the world. That's the invitation. And that daily bread shows up differently for each of us. The way that we are fed and fulfilled is different for everyone. That's the unique fingerprints of humanity. That's the special gifts and talents and perspectives and skills that we bring to our lives. And each of us uplifted in the same way, with everything that is required to be this gift, to shine this light, to be the love of the infinite expressing in a new way. That is love unfolding. That is being fed by the daily bread. And that's what's happening now for each of us in our own way. And I am so, so grateful for it. I'm grateful for the good. I'm grateful for the way it's unfolding. And I'm grateful for the peace of mind that each of us experiences as it happens. And so with feeling of thanks for all of this goodness, I speak this word and I let it go. And I know that the infinite is already saying yes. This good is underway. And so it is.
The Practical Prayer Podcast with Reverend Bill Marchiony and Carol Lawrence is a production of BeTheLight.com,
be-the-light.com.
where you can find more information about practical prayer for real results.
Our theme is by Music of Wisdom. You can learn about the spiritual community of New Thought Philadelphia with daily guided meditations,
Weekly celebrations of spirit
and Reverend Bill's classes in practical spirituality
at newthoughtphilly.org.
That is the Practical Prayer Podcast recording for episode number 179. Thank you to the folks joining us on Insight Timer. And thank you for playing along, Carol.
Oh, my pleasure.
Because me speaking authoritatively about the Lord's Prayer in front of you should be very intimidating for me.
It doesn't seem like it. I think you do just fine with it, don't you?
I've faked along very nicely, I guess. Seem to have made it work.
Okay.
I'm looking at the other definitions that AI has about what it means. And it's basically just repetitions of the other things that people have been saying over and over again. And some of them get quite far afield. And they don't seem to mean, give us this day our daily bread.
Yeah, I've not looked at AI for any biblical interpretation yet. I probably should and see what the difference might be. My familiarity with biblical interpretation is very much traditional, Scofield, which everybody thinks is really God. And the many like Scofield, and I'm thinking, okay, all right, that's good, but I think we can look a little bit differently. But I that's where I start there because that's where I know most people start.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move from there. But new thought is where you're allowed to. It's a huge step. So if you're thinking about it, it's a huge step to a bigger place of thinking and stepping into a place where you can grow even bigger because the available possibilities are there where they're not in the traditional space.
Right.
This is how it is. But here we are in a big world where experience has no boundaries in terms of religion or spirituality. Life is just life. Life happens. Now, how are you going to interpret it? And how are you going to help make sense of it? I would like to have the most possibilities of all, available to me to experience what I might be going through because, it helps me to contextualize what works for me as opposed to what works for my neighbor. And well, anyway, that's certainly probably another podcast.
I'm surprised we actually combined two topics together and made it coherent at all this time. So I'm pretty proud of us.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
I'm going to say thank you again to the folks. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as long as you give people something to think about, that's what's important to me. They can think. You don't have to come away with an answer or a vote. I go this way, I go that way. But at least if you see two sides, then you have something to think about, and Spirit will work that through your head, and through your heart. And guess what? Maybe you will come to a conclusion that's different than the one you had. You'll come out into a bigger space, maybe.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
Okay. We'll see. We'll see. Thank you to everybody who's joining us on New Thought Media Network for playing along. And if you have a question or a comment and you're watching the recordings of this, then you can go to BeTheLight.com, be-the-light.com, and put the comment in there in the Practical Prayer Podcast section, and we will be sure to address it in an upcoming episode. Carol, thank you so much. You bring wonderful topics to this and keep the conversation going and keep me corralled a little bit. A little bit.
My pleasure.
I'll see you next week.